Our chips are back. We're talking about some Final Fantasy XVI, and we have a couple updates for the game, one being the release date, one being the demo. And then we, of course, have this already kind of infamous interview that the 16 dev team did with IGN just a couple days ago. And I'm sure you already know what it's about, but I think we have to talk about it. We got to discuss it. And actually, before we even hop into those things, I just came across this from Silicon Era that during a near reincarnation in Final Fantasy XIV crossover stream, Yoshida confirmed that there is another trailer for 16 that's already finished. It's just, it had to be delayed for some reason, but that should be coming out relatively soon. It's kind of crazy because we just got this Ambition trailer not that long ago. It's also kind of crazy just given that we've only had 3 trailers for this game. They've been relatively spread out. We got the reveal trailer, obviously, back in like late 2020. And then we also got, earlier this year, like 4 or 5 months ago, we got that other trailer and the Ambition trailer just like 2 weeks ago. And then now they're already talking about showing another trailer, which by itself is also kind of crazy just because there's still quite a bit of time until the game's dropping, right? It's summer 2023. So we still got like half a year or so, or more or less, whatever, until the game's going to drop. So it's kind of crazy they already wanted to show a 4th trailer. And then there should be another trailer or 2, I would think, before release. So Yoshida and a couple other devs did an interview with Dengeki Online, and within this interview is where we get Yoshida talking about the potential for a release date reveal and also the upcoming demo or trial version, as he calls it. So this right here is just a Google Translate of the question and answer, just because I couldn't find any websites that had an actual translation of the part where he talks about the potential release date, so I figured we'd just find it ourselves. But anyways, the question is, this is a quick question, but when do you plan to release the next information? Yoshida, we plan to release the next information at the end of the year. At that time, I hope to be able to announce the release date as well. This time, I forced the company to give me more time to lay the groundwork, so I don't think the release date will be later than the summer of 2023. So for one, I do like that he put emphasis on there shouldn't be a delay for the game, because I do see some people talking about that just because of the vagueness of summer 2023. That could be like 4 or so months of any time the game can come out, right? But I do think that with the vagueness of that, I don't think there would be a delay because they're not like stuck on any one release date, right? It could be anywhere at the beginning of the summer of 2023 or at the end of it, anywhere in between. Plus, if they delay it at all, that just gets it closer and closer to Rebirth, right? Because Rebirth is going to drop winter 2023, and you obviously don't want them too close together. They can definitely release in the same year and all that other shit or whatever that people think they can't do. But you just don't want them too close together because you want people to take the time to play 16 and maybe any sort of, add-ons or expansions or DLC there might be. I don't know. And then we have Yoshida talking about the upcoming demo at some point. Well, details of the battle system and other details come out at the end of the year. If the information is released too early, the excitement won't be maintained until the release. So I think the information will be released in a rush about 3 months before the release. We also plan to distribute a trial version, but we intend to do it with the momentum of soon to be released as soon as it is released. Nowadays, entertainment is overflowing, so I want to cherish freshness. That may be a little frustrating at the moment, but as the release approaches, we'll release information all at once, so please wait patiently. So I think everything that he said right there obviously just makes sense. I think most devs usually drop their demos pretty close to release date. I mean, maybe some spread it out or whatever the case. But generally speaking, from the games that I've played, demos and betas and stuff happen like 1 to 3 months before the game's actually going to drop, right? So it makes more sense to have it closer to release. That way you can play it and then keep that excitement, the momentum, as he talked about, until the game actually drops. And the concept of a demo for 16 is exciting, but also it just makes sense. It's to be expected. We've talked about this a lot on the channel. But Square Enix, for one, drops demos for most, if not all, their games, but especially with the Final Fantasy series, for at least 7 upwards. I'm not sure about like the cartridge games, 6 and back, if there were demos or not. There might have been. But for sure, with like the disc-based Final Fantasies and beyond, every single numbered entry and its sequels have had demos, so it's not really a surprise. The kind of TLDR and all that, despite these interviews that we already have currently, there's going to be even more information within the next month or so, and if all things go correctly, there could be a release date revealed as well by the end of the year, and also a trailer, obviously, at some point. That being said, though, even if they do release a release date, despite what Yoshida said, there could be a delay. Like, summer 2023 is going to be like June to September, so like let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that the release date is sometime within June or July. They could still delay the game if they need to like August or September, and that would still put it in summer 2023. Okay, moving on to this IGN interview. Now, there's a lot to this. We're not going to read the whole thing because that would make the video so much longer than it needs to be. But it'll be linked in the description below if you want to check it out and read it yourself. And presumably, if you're a 16 fan, you've already read it anyways because it's been a few days. Same with the Dengeki Online interview. That thing's massive as well, so we couldn't read all that either. We are going to read one part of it besides the hot button topic that's out there right now because it's about the linearity of the game and the story and the areas of exploration, which obviously is something everybody's kind of wondering. So they ask, how linear is the story? How expansive are the individual areas? How much exploration is available? Will there be optional side quests that expand significantly on the lore? Hiroshi Takai responds, the part that we'll call the main story is a rich, expansive narrative that moves forward without any branching points. However, there are lots of side stories interspersed around the main story. These side stories give a lot of insight into the lore and show different sides of the characters. The areas themselves are of varying sizes, some smaller and some larger, but there are multiple so-called field areas of around 2 square kilometers, containing settlements and other features within them. As you progress through the story, you'll also encounter quite a good number of areas called stages. Although you can walk fairly freely around the filled areas, it's not like you need to really pour your energy into exploration to avoid the game becoming difficult to make progress with later on. In each area, we've included places to gather resources, search for strong enemies called elite marks, and situations that Clive will need to overcome whilst the powers he's obtained from the eikons are restricted. So it's not a game that you can finish in its entirety by only following the main story. So first up, as somebody who hasn't really kept up with the game that much, this is the first time I'm hearing about like resource gathering and shit like that. So it's kind of interesting. It makes me think a little bit of like 15, because 15 had a bunch of shit you can obviously find around the world, treasures and like magic things to absorb and like ingredients and stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious what the resources are that you are gathering. But also like that obviously there's going to be side quests, which is what you want. You don't want to just be super linear. You want side objectives, and also like delete marks, things kind of cool. But then the size of areas are going to be varying from like smaller to upwards of like 2 kilometers square, which isn't a bad like size. That's roughly about a mile, a little over a mile. But also to kind of point out that there's not gonna be like branching parts of the main story. Like I don't really expect that anyways with Final Fantasy games. Like I love RPGs with choices, of course. That's why I play like the Fallout and Elder Scrolls games and stuff like that. But ultimately, I also like a story being told to me. I like to just be there for the journey, so I don't want branching, points and stuff like that when it comes to my Final Fantasy games usually. So on to the kind of hot topic right now, and it's about IGN asking Yoshida whether or not there are going to be people of color or black people specifically within Final Fantasy XVI at some point, and people were not happy with his response. And this has actually been a conversation for a while, just because none of the trailers have depicted people of color, especially the last trailer, Ambition trailer. You go through the whole entire trailer and you just see white people, so it's like a pretty popular topic actually, even before this IGN interview came out. And I realized before we get into this conversation that I am very clearly a white person. Very, very white. Almost blindingly so. So a lot of people aren't going to give a fuck about my opinions on that. As ironic as that is, because of the color of my skin, my thoughts and opinions on this topic just tend to not matter for some people. And I only say that because I've experienced that before with this community. Back like before Remake came out, we got that State of Play trailer, and like people were talking about how offensive and racist Barrett sounded. But that was very reactionary because it was such a short trailer. Barrett had like 2 lines of dialogue and some grunting during combat, and people were already forming opinions on it. And obviously, a year later, we get Remake, and Barrett is in no way offensive or racist. But obviously, because I'm not a person of color, me giving my thoughts and opinions on that back then, just some people just didn't give a shit. But obviously, by the end of it, I was proven right, because once the game came out, again, he was not offensive or racist or a stereotype of black people. He was just a great character. So what we're going to do is just read the question and answer, and Yoshida gives a pretty lengthy answer, so I want him to say his piece before we talk, right? In regards to diversity in the game, can we expect to see black characters in Final Fantasy XVI or people of color, non-white characters in general? To clarify a bit more, there's been discussion around the trailers to date featuring mostly white characters, and I wanted to get clarity on whether we can expect the final game to be more diverse. This is a difficult question, but not one that was unexpected, seeing as diversity in entertainment media has become a much discussed topic as of late. The answer I have, however, may end up being disappointing to some depending on individual expectations. Our design concept from the early stages of development has always heavily featured medieval Europe, incorporating historical, cultural, political, and anthropological standards that were prevalent at the time. When deciding on a setting that was best suited to the story we wanted to tell, the story of a land beset by the Blight, we felt that rather than create something on a global scale, it was necessary to limit the scope to a single landmass, one geographically and culturally isolated from the rest of the world in an age without airplanes, television, or telephones. Due to the underlying geographical, technological, and geopolitical constraints of the setting, Valistea was never going to realistically be as diverse as, say, a modern-day Earth, or even Final Fantasy XIV that has an entire planet and moon worth of nations, races, and cultures at its disposal. The isolated nature of this realm, however, does end up playing a large part in the story and is one of the reasons Valistea's fate is tied to the rest of the world. We're actually going to stop right there really quick because I have to address something, because he talks about how it's based on like medieval Europe, which is obviously would have been prominently or maybe all the way white outside of maybe potentially slaves, because the slave trade has been around for a very long time. But he talks about how this is a world that didn't have like, airplanes, televisions, and telephones and stuff like that, right? And it's like isolated from the rest of the world, etc., etc. That's why there's not people of color, essentially. This is reasoning. It's actually not true and actually doesn't make any sense at all. We have this quote right here from an interview. I don't know where it comes from. I just know about this because Night Sky Prince tweeted this out like a couple weeks ago. But Yoshida says this during an interview. There actually once existed an incredibly advanced ancient civilization in Valistea known as the Civilization in the Sky. However, within the game's lore, about 1500 years ago, a great war waged upon the land and brought an end to that civilization. The ruins are scattered among Valistea, and when you chance upon them, you might hear talk from the current residents of the land along the lines of, see that ancient ruin sticking out right there? Apparently it used to fly high in the sky. Although the game is set in a medieval time and brimming with nature, we do plan to delve a bit further into the aforementioned points little by little. So with that particular interview right there, like he literally contradicted in the past what he said recently in the IGN interview, because in the history of this planet, there was a highly technologically advanced civilization that had the ability to fly in the sky. They would have been flying around the entire planet, So there would be culturally diverse locations in Valistea. The fact that, 1,500 years in the future, people would just, go back to their homelands. This doesn't make any fucking sense. There'd be people of color in Valistea. Unless he's trying to say that the people that live in and around Valistea have always only lived here, and, they just don't venture out into the rest of the world for some goddamn reason, even though there's several different countries and, islands and shit in Valistea. If they just, in theory, have stayed here forever for, 1,500 years now, I guess, or even beyond that, it just sounds stupid, in my opinion. If you have the ability to fly, you're obviously going to be flying around the world, right? But even if you take out the ability to fly, airplane-like technology, you still have ships and boats and shit that would be sailing around the world, right? Exploring the world. Why would you just stay in Valistea? It just doesn't make any sense. It's just stupid. It's a dumb reason. Ultimately, we felt that incorporating ethnic diversity into Valistea was important, and over-incorporation into the single corner of a much larger world could end up causing a violation of those narrative boundaries we originally set for ourselves. The story we are telling is fantasy, yes, but is also rooted in reality. Conversely, the Final Fantasy series of games have always inherently dealt with conflict and struggle, especially between the empowered and those used and or exploited by those privileged few, a prominent trend in human history. In a game that, by design, allows players to experience that conflict and struggle firsthand through dynamic, realistic battles, it can be challenging to assign distinctive ethnicities to either antagonists or protagonists without triggering audience preconceptions, inviting unwarranted speculation, and ultimately stoking flames of controversy. The best part of pulling inspiration directly from history, however, is that it allows us to revisit and re-examine our own past, while also allowing us to create something new. In the end, we simply want the focus to be less on the outward appearance of our characters and more on who they are as people. People who are complex and diverse in their natures, backgrounds, beliefs, personalities, and motivations. People whose stories we can resonate with. There is diversity in Valistea. Diversity that, while not all-encompassing, is synergistic with the setting we've created and is true to the inspirations from which we are drawing. So kind of the TLDR and all that, the reasoning for there not being that many people of color, if any at all, when it comes to 16, is that it's supposed to be based on historical accuracy to medieval Europe, right? Which I get what he's trying to say there, and now there's already some people debunking that. I'll just use MJ Gallagher's tweet right here, where he kind of debunks some of this shit. But even if that is true, right? Even if what Yoshida's saying is accurate, true, whatever the case, it is a video game. It's a fake world, right? It's not even like a game that's set on Earth, right? So it makes even less sense that you're trying to stick to this European medieval time thing, because it's not real. It's not a real world. Just because you're based on medieval Europe doesn't mean you got to exclude people of color. We also have this location, which is where the kind of controversy came from with the Ambition trailer, because obviously there's a lack of people of color in that trailer, but then they show off this location. And I don't know if the dev team for 16 understand how this works, but if people lived here, they'd be very dark complected. We know that based on our world, in fact, the world that they're pulling history from. But also, one of the other reasons he gives in that long, extensive answer is, they struggle to do people of color for an antagonist or a protagonist, and it might piss off some people if they do that, stoking controversy, etc., etc. But, the fact that you're intentionally going out of your way to not include them for whatever reason that you're giving is where the controversy lies, right? All you had to do is have just a couple people of color. You look at FF7, right? You look at Remake, you look at Midgar, there's people of color all around the world, right? But if you look at the main party, other than, Kate Sith, I guess, they're all white, except for Barrett and Yuffie, of course. Yuffie's of, Asian descent, of course, and Barrett's a black man, right? But that's all you needed, is just a couple of representations. If Final Fantasy XVI had just a couple of prominent characters that were of color, then everything would be fine for the most part, right? The fact that they're avoided people of color is where the controversy itself begins. But again, it's just a dumb reason and excuse, because we're basing it on the history of a world that our game is not set in. So, it's just stupid to say. But even as we pointed out earlier, right, 1,500 years ago, this land had the ability to fly. This world had the ability to fly around it. Even if people within Valistea didn't venture out into the rest of the world, people would come to them inevitably, right? They would sell to their lands to explore the world. They'd come across new continents and stuff like that. Just like we did here in the IRL world, right? That you're basing your motherfucking game on, dude. This makes sense. The idea that we don't have airplanes, so everybody's white, it's stupid. It's just dumb to say. And to be honest, there is a bit of a whitewashing to the franchise as of late, oddly enough. We had this conversation a bit on Twitter where the character of Tidus from Final Fantasy X these days is just randomly white. For starters, here's a picture of Tidus from the game Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, which obviously if you've played Final Fantasy X, he looks sick. You look sick, bro. You need to eat something, get some sleep. You also have this art right here, which was overseen by Tetsuya Nomura for some sort of upcoming Kabuki play for Final Fantasy X, but again, he's very much white. And if you just take a look at what Tidus looks like, of course, on the cover of Final Fantasy X, but also his character model in 10, and also the cinematic scenes from Final Fantasy X, he's very motherfucking tan. So, what is going on? And also just the fact that, Final Fantasy X is kind of based on, the Pacific Islands, so a lot of people are tan, right? In general, there's obviously are some white people and pale white people in FF10. But the fact that, he's always been tan for, 20 or so years now, and then all of a sudden, in other games and media, we're starting to see a very pale white Tidus. It's just strange. It's just weird. I don't know what's going on with Square Enix. That's more or less the video, my dudes. Just wanted to talk about this, discuss it. I've seen people like kind of somewhat defending Square Enix. Square Enix doesn't need to go woke and all this other shit, which is kind of crazy because I thought people would stop saying woke in like 2018. But apparently people are still talking about that. But you don't have to be woke to include just a couple of people of color in your game, bro. Like, again, if they just had a couple of prominent characters, 2 or 3 people of color, there would be no conversation. Everybody would have been satisfied. Maybe people would want more than that, but at least if we had some of that, some representation, the conversation would be a lot less. But the fact that they're going out of their way to avoid people of color is the goddamn weird part. But kind of branching out of the Final Fantasy franchise, because there does seem to be some problems with that, there are people that are defending Square Enix in that, like, we're about to get Forspoken, which is going to have, a black lead female. So, like, that's some progression there, right? But it seems to be something wrong with, like, the Final Fantasy franchise when it comes to representation, which, again, it's fucking weird. But that's the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the show if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, dashingdavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine or leave it like Cobain.